So we're now streaming live.
Okay, so afternoon, members, and welcome to the meeting, and thank you, David, for joining us again. Gemma, I think, have you sent out a pack? Do you want to just take us through the necessary bits for the packs, and then I think we're handing over to David, is that right?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Do we have any apologies for absence? I don't think we do. We're just waiting on Sir Martin. And any declarations of interest? No? Okay. To approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of October. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Super. Okay, at that point then, I will hand over to David.
Thank you, Gemma. Are you able to share the slides, or do you want me to do that? Would I do that? Sorry, you're on mute, Gemma.
Sorry, would you be able to?
Yeah, just bear with me a moment. Where are we? Okay. In fact, I'll just right. No, I'm not able to share. It says it's disabled.
Bear with me a second. I just need to change my settings. Okay, you should now be a co-host, so you should be able to...
Okay, hang on. Oh, yes, yeah. No, which one are we sharing here? We all see that one, is that okay?
Yeah,
that works for me.
Fantastic. Okay, right. Okay, so we know why we're here, so I won't dither on this slide. Here we go. So just to recap from the last meeting, so there was agreement, as you'll recall, on thresholds for referral of key decisions, and also agreement on the rescission process as set out there. There was discussion around financial limits for committee decisions, or financial thresholds, if you like, for matters above that threshold to then be decided by committee that we need to discuss and consider further. So that will be part of today's meeting as well. There's the all-member briefing to be finalised. We've got a slide on that. A date has been set, but we'll come to that one. There was a request by group members for comparison of previous cabinet decisions and where those decisions would be made in the new structure. So Gemma's done some work around that and shared the document, so we can come to that later on. And then we've got this, spokesperson issue to bottom out and to discuss and clarify, as well as what the role of the chair and the vice chair might be. And I think, to be fair, those last two bullet points, spokespersons and roles, and chair and vice chair roles, are quite closely interlinked potentially. We don't want there to be significant crossover and duplication, of course. So we'll move on. As before, if you've got a question you want to raise as I'm going through this, then please do. But we'll have a general discussion at the end if you want to wait till that point. So the most difficult one first. I'm wondering why I did that. Probably better to have put it at the end, but hey ho, we've got it up on screen. Spokespersons. So I know last time I'd suggested that I would go away and give it further thought, which I have done, and potentially provide some different iterations of what that might look like. I haven't done that. The reason being is I've actually spent quite a bit of time thinking about it, and I keep coming back to the same issue. And that for me is difficult. Well, it's a difficulty in defining all of these things. So the scope, how it's going to be aligned, what the duties are. I mean, the appointment element isn't necessarily troublesome, but there's also the risk element as well that I touched upon last time. So I think it's really important to go back to basic principles, or the principles and the reasons behind what we're doing, in essence. So by which I mean, why did you want to change from an executive to a committee system? And my understanding is that the principal driver was to move away from having power or decision making around issues relevant to the council being focused in one small group of individuals, and to enable wider involvement and wider responsibility for decision making by committee. And I can't help but think in terms of spokespersons' roles, particularly, I'm not suggesting that it would have to be, as presently sort of loosely set out, that there would have to be 9 individuals, but it just seems to me that it's kind of creeping back towards what might be an executive, and that's something we want to move away from. And I know that spokespersons would not and cannot by law have decision-making powers. I just feel that I'm not suggesting that we get rid of spokespersons. I've in fact been thinking about another potential way of allowing for something similar that's actually more reflective of the reasons why you're looking to move or have made that decision to move across to a different structure. So I mean, just to go through each of these, we've got, scope and the alignment. So alignment in terms of, I was thinking through, well, could it be a theme or could it be a particular issue? So you see in other councils, member champions, and sometimes they're aligned with topics such as disability or armed forces or, things like that. So that might be a potential option. Could be that those spokespersons are aligned exactly with committees, but then I think, well, there's a risk there, isn't there, in terms of treading on or overlapping with the chair, and what's the chair's responsibility? Is the chair's responsibility simply to manage and govern meetings and ensure that business is done, or does the chair have a different role or a more extensive role in terms of being the point of contact for that committee and being the one that's pushing forward that committee's goals, aims, agenda, etc. And it got me back to thinking, well, actually, if I was going to be separating out spokespersons and how the alignment might fit best, it would probably be similar to the portfolios that are presently in place. There's a reason why those portfolios are in place. And I think, but then again, we get back to that position of, well, this is starting to become something that looks a bit more like an executive, or as if there's a will to cling on to elements of that, whereas this isn't really what the purpose of a committee system is. And then we look at duties. What would the role be? And at the moment, the draft terms of reference or job description, if you like, for the spokesperson, which we looked at last time, and I know Phil has put together, is very generic and it's very vague. And again, I was trying to think to myself, how can we narrow this down and bottom it out so it is specific, so we're not creating unnecessary risks around what that role might encompass and overburdening members who are spokespersons and overburdening resources, etc. But it's been incredibly difficult for me to really think, well, without me sort of telling you, well, this person can only do this, this, and this. It's not ideal, and I think it sort of falls away from the concept or the reason why this was put forward in the first place. So reporting, I mean, that's not problematic. Spokesperson I would suggest be expected to report back to committee on what their activities have been and what they've been focusing on. That's fine. I suppose the only issue there would be, well, on what frequency would that take place? Would it be quarterly? Would it be 6 monthly? I don't know, but that, of course, relies on there being spokespersons in the first place and understanding what their scope is and what the alignment of those individual posts is. And as I say, the appointment isn't necessarily problematic, but the risks element, again, I think there's a risk of focusing. For me, it's going back again to that core principle of, well, why are you doing all of this? Why are you moving away from executive? And it's because you want to have that collective responsibility. And this, to me, having an individual spokesperson, albeit they don't have any decision-making powers, is kind of focusing on a set of specific individuals and them being the interface between the authority and other stakeholders. So there's an issue there in terms of, again, there's a risk of the perception of third parties around the roles of the spokespersons and what they can and can't do. There's a risk to those spokespersons in terms of there needs to be absolute clarity and specificity around what they're doing, so as not to put them at risk of, and we mentioned last time, this thing around potentially agreeing to enter into contracts or whatever without even realizing they've done it, and then legal arguments that could be made ultimately to say, well, notwithstanding that you didn't intend to, in law, it was reasonable for that third party to think that you might have that authority to enter into those agreements or contracts or other arrangements. So there's those risks. So I guess what I'm saying is I think we need to think about this a bit more carefully and have further discussions. But the alternative that I was mulling over and wanted to sort of discuss with you was to have instead, and it's something I think that probably works more effectively to reflect the reason why you're moving to and Councillor Prater, says you're in the waiting room, but I can see okay, yeah, probably reflects the reasons why you're moving towards a committee system better. And what I was going to suggest to you is considering within each committee the ability to look at horizon scanning. I hate that phrase, but I've used it anyway, and you know what it means. So looking at what's coming along, what's important to the council, what are the council's objectives, what's the council's plans, corporate plans, what do we need to be focusing on, rather than having this sort of rather vague scope that a spokesperson might have, and saying, okay, so we want to be looking at this particular topic. It's a big issue for our residents. It's something that our party is really passionate about, etc., or members are passionate about. So we want to set up a working group. So committee could then determine to say, right, we're going to set up a working group and define exactly what they're going to be looking at so that it's clear, but also define what the outcomes, the expectation of the outcomes are, so we know what the benefit and the value of them undertaking that work is. And that group, I would suggest, or would have a spokesperson to lead that group, so the person that takes the reins and feeds back on behalf of that group. And I got thinking, well, you could potentially have it whereby it's not necessarily a group, it's an individual. But then I got thinking, well, actually, that's just, again, slightly going against the purpose for which you're making the change. And it's not allowing best use of the broad spectrum of skills and experience that members have. So I think having a group is better because it allows that principle of collective involvement, which I think is really important and what is underpinning the move that you're making. And just to go back to another issue with spokespersons, if you were to appoint a spokesperson, let's say they were responsible for environment, very broad area, and they went off and they had this scope to look at things that were potentially of interest to the council, or we just what the role potentially might be. But by having that fixed as an individual, again, that kind of rails against this collective involvement, and it also risks where you've got broad areas of interest such as the environment, not allowing other members who might have a specific interest or a specific skill set or specific experience in something which you might describe as a subcategory of the environmental umbrella, for them to step in and to drive something forward. So there's that element as well. So I was just thinking whether that might be a better way of doing it, and that the chairs of the committees themselves would be I suppose point of contact for the first point of contact between members and the public in terms of this scope and the areas of their committees of which they're chairs, and to be the ambassador, if you like, for those areas, and that they could have, you might have it whereby officers can consult with the chair, or members can consult with the chair and say, look, this is an area we want to look at. Can we get a meeting together? And is this something potentially we can look at setting up a working group with a lead spokesperson, so we can get this information or whatever it is we're trying to do and bring that back in to inform decision making, rather than having this vague floating spokesperson who doesn't have any powers, and which, as I say, kind of reflects in a number of ways, without the powers to make decisions, as I've just said, the executive structure, whereas we're trying to be more about collective decision making, but recognizing that there will be topics on which further member involvement is required, and that's why it might be appropriate to have that function or facility to be able to set up focused groups that can look at these things, rather than it being I'm quite interested in this or this, and it has that. Without that, it has that risk of mission creep, another phrase I don't like, but I've used again. So, and those groups can have, as I said earlier, clearly defined terms of reference. This is what we want to look at, and this is why we're looking at it. This is how it ties in with our corporate goals, our corporate aims, our policies, and issues on the forward plan, or that sort of thing, rather than it just being something that is a little bit vague. Well, not a little bit vague, a lot vague. And I think we are collectively struggling to sort of settle on something for spokespersons because of the fact that it is so, well, it's a bit vague, and not really able. You're not really able to tie it in specifically by saying, right, you will have these specific purposes and roles, because there's nothing to then tie that back into specific objectives and specific items on the forward plan, or specific corporate goals and aims, etc. So I think doing it in the way that I've suggested, allows it not to be focused in a set of specific individuals, a la executive, and allows that collective decision making, but also allows there to be a managed and focused goal for those working groups that can then feed properly back into real issues that are exercising members and members of the public. Sorry, Susan, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much, David, and appreciate you sort of taking us through that, and always best doing the knotty issues first. I wanted to ask a question, really, just as a way of trying to sort of navigate a way through this. And clearly we want to hear from members about what their views are about, themes and everything like that. But I just wondered, David, just sort of legally and from your experience, is it possible just to have the chairs of the two committees and the chairs of the subcommittees and have spokesperson within their role and remit? I mean, is that the way that we avoid the confusion between chairs, vice chairs, spokespersons, champions? Is it a way that we say, well, the chairs of the two committees and the chairs of any of the subcommittees, part of their role is to blah blah blah, however we define it? Is that possible in your experience?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's possible. That's certainly one way to do it, to have the chair as part of their remit being the spokesperson. And that, as you say, will help avoid overlap and confusion. Certainly, yeah. So legally, it's absolutely possible. But of course, there's no individual decision-making powers, which we accept, we understand, we know that that's the purpose, or one of the things that results by moving to a committee system.
And just on that, before I know members want to come in, so if that did have, if that was a way through this, we've got resources, we've got communities, we've got a housing subgroup, and then we've got a shareholder subgroup, and what else have we got at the moment designed in?
Licensing.
A&G.
We've got planning, yeah, as well, and so it was the housing and shareholders, wasn't it, as you said, I think, and yeah, I think that's
so it's important to think about the design, because we haven't quite firmed up the design yet either, have we? I think we've spoken about a housing subgroup, and we've spoken about the shareholder subgroup, which I think is relevant for Opportunitas, Otterpool Park, and the FPPG Trust. But we do need to just make sure we've got that design bit right. A way of saying, well, what does that give us then if those chairs are spokespersons? Clearly, there'd be a spokesperson for the housing subcommittee if we're going to go down that route. There'd be a spokesperson for the shareholder interests, and then there'd be 2 others. So I can see how we just need to get this bit of design clear. But anyway, over to members.
okay. Was it Councillor Hollingsby first?
I'm not sure, but I'm happy to go. I quite like Susan's idea. I have to say, this is what I've been saying really at every meeting. What are we doing here? Because it seems to me that all we're doing is reflecting a cabinet system that takes away all the powers. I mean, it's quite clear from the last minutes where you made some comments saying that we've done, and Susan agreed with me last time, is give more delegation to officers, taken responsibility and a lot of decision making away from members. I think before, or my view, before even we think about what kind of spokespeople we might have or might not have, is the roles of the chairman. I mean, I did ask the question last time about could the chairman be the same for both committees, both main committees, and the answer is yes. So I'm just wondering how we would operate. I mean, is it something we could say that we wouldn't want the chairman to be the same person for both committees and vice chairman? It's just a question before you even go any further. What's that role? And if you're going to have spokespeople for each topic, then what is the role of the chairman?
Well, this is it. I suppose if you are having a separate spokesperson, the role of the chairman becomes something more administrative, doesn't it? In terms of simply, well, I say simply, it's not a simple task at all, but sitting to preside over meetings and to keep order and ensure business is transacted appropriately. But, yeah, why not, if you're going to have a spokesperson, combine the two, because then they will naturally be a focus anyway, being the chair of a committee, and they would be expected, I think, to be an ambassador for the areas over which they preside, in essence. So, merging them together, perhaps. I mean, just going back to a point you made there, Councillor Hollingsby, around, the decision was to increase to increase officers' delegated powers and reduce members' decision making. Yes and no is my response to that. It's a case of increasing collective member decision making, but because you don't have that executive system where individuals can make decisions, then an element of that then needs to go to officers to enable effective running of the council. So because otherwise you get to a point where nobody is able to take decisions quickly, in the extreme, of course, and it can really sort of impact upon getting things done, and things can grind to a halt very quickly. So it's more a case of increasing the scope of officer delegations so that they can take more decisions to enable effective and efficient running of the council, but also increasing collective member decision making as well. So it's both of those things, really. Councillor McConville.
Thanks.
Yeah, try that.
No.
Councillor Prated, I think if you can mute yours, I don't know if it is muted or because it seems there's a feedback loop.
How's that? Is that better?
Slightly. It's still quite an echo. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Multiple things in one room. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, just sort of coming back to our last meeting. I sort of tried to sort of highlight the fact that the spokespeoples, for me, in my mind, would be the two chairs, the two vice chairs, and hopefully the four chairs of the subcommittees. So I mean, all the spokespeople already have a definitive role, appointed by full council, a term of 1 year until between AGMs, and it would just give a bit more focus to those roles, to say that that they have a bit more of a focus. In a lot of councils that have committee systems, I mean, they've got multiple committees, don't they? You'd agree they have 6 to 8 committees. So we're trying to do this in a very condensed, very streamlined sort of way. So to have those sort of, you've got a core team of 4 on each committee, or really a core team of 8 across the council, sort of like making sure that things are being done as quickly and without duplication as possible. So I mean, that's where, for me, that's where the spokesperson role sort of lies. It's not an additional sort of role. You don't have chairs, vice chairs, or chairs of subcommittee and then spokespeople. They are one in the same, and that is sort of the elected group that is elected at the AGM to take on those roles that would drive forward the business of the council.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Just a couple of things from me. I think one of the key things that I'm trying to get into my head really is, I think it'll help with how we decide where people are and whether we decide we're going to go with assigning these the way that we've spoken about previously, or as we discussed today, and that is, how are spokespersons briefed? And in that respect, I think you'll then, and sort of Connor alluded to it, if it's within, if they're going to be briefed because it's part and parcel of what they're doing as chairman of the committee, then it's understood. If they're briefed separately through some other mechanism, we need to understand what that's going to be. And I think that will help us with our deliberations about, how we then make sure that those people who are the spokesperson are speaking with authority, but not having any legal authority, if that sort of makes sense. You did caution us last time to say we have to be a little bit careful about committee chairs being a spokesperson, because it could be too broad. And also, if the spokesperson is the committee chair, then it lends itself a little bit more. And again, what you cautioned us is on ostensible authority, about how people might be perceived to then be representing the position of the council, and decisions that they may or may not make may be taken out of context with regard to that. And I think finally we also said that the spokespersons were not going to attract a special responsibility allowance. So again, I think if they are chairs or vice chairs, then they'll already have that responsibility allowance, so we don't have to worry about them attracting an additional allowance on top of that. So that would be my comment really. But primarily it's, how are they briefed? And if it does align with them, with their role as a chairman or a vice chairman, and providing that makes that we make sure that that's not too broad a role, then I think that fits well then. But you still end up with a very small number of people, and again, it looks like a cabinet, but looking at it through a different end of the other end of the telescope. That's all I would say, really, David. Thank you.
No, that's helpful. I mean, in terms of how they'd be briefed, I mean, there's again potential number of ways of doing it, but I think the most to me, at this time, I would suggest that if they were going to be briefed, they should be briefed when the chairs are briefed, because then you avoid duplication, and there's a consistent message that's being given through a briefing, rather than having two separate ones where something slightly different might be said and it might result in something else. So again, I think that kind of weighs towards in favour of the chairs being having that spokesperson's role to avoid the duplication there, potentially. But I mean, it's right. I mean, this thing about ostensible authority, and I think it's an issue regardless of whether the chair is also having that spokesperson role within their scope, or whether it's the spokesperson is separate. I suppose thinking about it, the key thing is being clear around what do their roles entail, but also giving members appropriate training around the risks and making sure they understand what could potentially happen in certain circumstances. So, and you could apply that either way with a separate spokesperson or the chair. But I mean, you said as well, if the chairs are spokespersons, then again, it's cabinet by a different name in essence, but arguably it's slightly different, because if you have a separate group of people separate from the committees, I would say that would more resemble or risk being seen as something akin to an executive or cabinet. So I think amalgamating the two, incorporating the spokesperson role within the chair's job description, if you like, is probably a sensible thing to do, which I think that's the feeling I'm getting from you. But we've of course, Councillor Prater, do you want to come in?
Thank you. I think we're in danger of agreeing violently at this moment. Is that we've got, as you just said, we've got the chair and vice chair of the two lead committees. You've got chairs of the subcommittees. So you'd have the shareholders group chair, you'd have the housing committee chair, the personnel committee chair, the chair and vice chair of the two lead committees. So finance and strategy on one side and community and environment on the other side. By the time you've got that group together, that's a group of chairs that you are going to brief, probably sometimes collectively, because you've got forward plan items and you're going to be explaining to people that forward plan, what's coming to each of you, and what the timeline is, what the interface between, which decisions are coming to each committee. So there's a briefing that is going to take place there collectively. If the answer is that you can call them not spokespeople as much as you like, but the chair of finance is going to have the title of leader of the council, and they're going to be pretty much lead on finance, or at least the vice chair of that committee is. The chair of the Communities Environment Committee is going to be the point person for either communities or environment. I'd suggest that the vice chair is the other one. That's just how it's going to be the work. The theory on spokespeople was that people had people to point at, but if the answer is it's easier for it just to be the chairs and the chairs of those committees, chairs and vice chairs of those committees, and the chairs of the subcommittees, and one aligns it with those, then fine. I'm not going to die in the ditch for that. I think that's a perfectly reasonable suggestion, and we do it that way. And as we've always said before, if that doesn't achieve our aims after May, and we find that we don't like it over a period of time, then we'll work out a way of refining that. But it does mean that there are essentially point people for those areas of responsibilities, but by making it specifically about those roles removes a number of the issues which I think are concerning you and Susan.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Prater. Susan, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, my concern is just making sure we get the design right, and at this stage, really, then we can get on with the drafting. Can I just check a couple of things? So I think what I've heard as a way through all of this is that we've got, I think I'm up to 10, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. The 10 that I've got are the resources chair and vice chair, the communities and environment chair and vice chair, the shareholder interest subcommittee chair, the personnel committee chair, the ANG committee chair, and then we've got planning committee chair and licensing committee chair. Have I got that right? And is everyone on the same page? Or please tell me if I've got that wrong.
Housing subcommittee chair you missed, but apart from that, the right, same page.
Yeah, so we're all about so I'm at 10. I'm at 10 people.
Yeah.
So resources, 2 people, communities environment, 2 people, housing subcommittee, shareholder interest subcommittee, A&G committee, planning committee, licensing committee, personnel committee. I think that is 10. And then if I can just check, I just want to just make sure, just legally, I'm on the right line here. Is the am I right, David, in thinking that it's not necessarily in law that the leader has to be chair of resources? Can I just check that? Is that a legal requirement that the leader of the council chairs a resources committee? Or is that a discretionary matter subject to obviously council, appointments as always with these positions? It'd be just helpful to clarify that for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd need to look at it to double check, but my understanding is that the chair of resources doesn't have to be the leader, and I think I've definitely seen that somewhere else previously. So, but I would need to check just to make sure, and I'll do that to give that certainty. But yeah, my view presently is that they can be separate. There's no requirement as such, but it's common, as you know, it's common.
I think that's correct, David, but like you, I'll check the position as well.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, Councillor Hollingsby.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to go back and check on my point really about the chairman being the same for both committees. How do we, is that a choice that we can make, or is there something we can do to say that shouldn't occur? I just would like to have clarity on that, please. Okay,
yeah. So as you say, technically you could have the same chair. It would be very unusual, and I think sensible not to. And certainly, in your standing orders, you could certainly incorporate something that states that the chair of one of those committees is not to be a chair of another one. That's entirely appropriate. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So,
but sorry, just on that, sorry, David. But again, is that discretionary or in law?
I think it's discretionary. It comes down to you being able to determine your own standing orders, subject to any other, actual requirements around things that have to be in there. But yeah, as far as I know, there's no legal restriction on somebody chairing more than one committee. But it is, I'm trying to think of a time when I've seen it, and I don't think I have seen it. I think it's normally pretty much, if you're a chair of one committee, and that's it. Okay.
I mean, if it helps, just operationally, I think the alignment of the as I think we're emerging to a consensus, but of those certainly 8 key chair roles, and then obviously we've got the 2 vice chairs of the main committees. Certainly, it's easier. It would be more straightforward and clearer for officers in briefing the chairs. So I think I don't immediately have a concern about that sort of briefing of the chairs in order for them to undertake that role. I can't see that being a problem. So hopefully that's helpful, members.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well that has been really helpful discussion. It really has. So thank you, members.
As far as I'm concerned, just if it helps Jenny, I certainly wouldn't have a problem with a standing order saying that the chair should be different people. That's part of the point of this exercise, is to distribute decision making. Having the same person being the chair of 8 committees sounds legally tenable, but also does not achieve your aim. So I think there's a standing order that is our intention, a standing order to set an intention that the chair should be a different person. The chair of each committee should be a different person. I think it's perfectly reasonable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I shall move on to the next slide, which is one of a number around financial thresholds. So I've set out on this slide. So one of the things, or the question marks around, if you remember from last session slides was around thresholds for environments, as well as thresholds for decisions on contracts and decisions on property. But so I've set out here the environments one, and that's the current limits. And what's happened, well, it wasn't, I think Amandeep has been in discussion, and Jenny has been in discussion, Gemma, sorry, with the Section 151 officer, who came back with some proposed financial thresholds for moving forward, and that's on the next slide. So if you, I think if we move to the next slide, then we can see, I can certainly flick back as well, because you'll see. So, well, if I mention it now, actually, so in terms of the current environment thresholds, anything over 25,000 would be by cabinet, and then you have various thresholds sitting under that, falling to heads of service, chief officers, and Susan as the head of paid service, etc. Whereas out of
curiosity, what happens if we have an environment of £22,500?
Based on the current arrangements?
Yeah.
Well, that's a very good point, isn't it? Perhaps one to pick up.
Isn't it good we're rewriting these thresholds so they make some sense?
Yes. Let's look at it in that way. So moving forward, this is what the suggested environments thresholds are. So the first bullet point there is that head of paid service can via payroll budget to various budget headings, and that's the same as in place presently. Then we've got chief officers having an ability to via within a budget heading and across budget headings up to 25,000, and then between 25 and 50, relevant director and the Section 151, and then between 50 and 100 would be director and 151 in consultation with the relevant committee chair or chairs, and then over. I've added that bullet point in because it wasn't on the slides that I sent through, so apologies. So just to make it clear, environments over 100k therefore would be coming to committee. So I don't know what obviously there's an uplift there in terms of thresholds around officers being able to take decisions around environments, but that is to be expected and would be sensible, or is sensible, because of the nature of what we're moving towards here. There needs to be, that greater flexibility for officers to make decisions. And something that isn't on there, but which I would also suggest, is that all environments are, as is the case. Well, the case now is that all environments are reported to cabinet if they're not being taken by cabinet. So what I would suggest here is you have something similar where all environments are reported to the relevant committee, so that there's oversight around that as well. But absolutely sensible to lift those thresholds to allow to I suppose account for the fact that you don't have members that can make the decisions themselves, without having it before a committee, which then potentially, when you're dealing with lower figures, the potential for having to take numerous reports increases, and that's not really what you need to be doing, and it's not what we want to be clogging up the committees with. So that they're not massive uplifts at all, but they are, I think, practical and sensible uplifts. Councillor Prater?
Yeah, 100,000 makes me bulk a bit, but my initial point is that you've got environments between 25 and 50, director and Section 151, and then between 50 and 100, director, Section 151, in consultation with relative committee chair. I think that if you're going to do environment above 25, then it's got to be in consultation with the relevant committee chair. I don't see that removing one person from it streamlines that process that extraordinarily, and just creates you another band. So I'd lose the band which doesn't include consultation with the relevant committee chair. And I'd make, so the 25k upwards band, I would make always in consultation with the relative committee chair until the environment goes to committee. I'm certainly open to discussion as to whether 100,000 is the right number at that stage. It sounds like quite a big number to me. I'd probably gone a bit lower than that, but I'm open to discussion.
Thank you. Do any of the members have any thoughts on that at all? Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, I support what Tim is saying, really, in terms of trying to simplify it and make it workable, but having the right level of oversight. And I think what you propose there, meets that requirement in terms of, the right level of consultation above what's a reasonable amount. But of course, you have to remember, and I think this is what Tim Fraser was probably alluding to, what's the value you can achieve with that money these days, and we need to be able to go and review that on a regular basis as well, based on the number of environments that are being made. And again, if that is coming back to individual committees, then they'll be able to form a judgment as to how it's working and whether it needs to be amended once we've bedded the whole thing in. That's what I would say, David, actually.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. So what I would suggest then, I mean, unless any other members have any input on that, we can have a further discussion with the 151 around thresholds. Personally, in my view, is I think that those thresholds would work. I take the point Councillor Prater around, doing away with that third band and having it 25 to 100, which requires consultation. I think we've got to remember that, all right, 100k might seem a lot. It actually isn't. Shall I say? I appreciate it's a lot in comparison with perhaps the threshold that is presently in place, but we've got a different system here. And also, as you've alluded, Councillor Thomas, that means by which reporting back is made, so members can have that oversight and see how it's working, and if they have any concerns about the way it's working, perhaps looking at changing thresholds. So my suggestion would be to leave it at 100k, and as well remembering, with that tweak suggested by Councillor Prater, if you've got between 25 and 100 requiring consultation with a committee chair, if that committee chair has got any concerns or issues about what's being proposed, then that will be flagged. Of course, it's not a case of officers are able to, between 25 and 100, just to go ahead and do it. So there's that safety valve as well. So I would say, I think with that tweak possibly put forward by Councillor Prater, the figures look reasonable to me, but I take what you're saying and happy to, we can feed back to the 151 on that one. Okay, right, I'll move on to the next slide. So again, financial thresholds 3, imaginative titles I've put on there, aren't they? So I just set out there what the key decision threshold currently is, because I think it's kind of important to bear that in mind when you're looking at the kind of thresholds you might put in place for, in this instance, decisions around award of contracts or the acquisition or disposal of land or property. So presently your key decision threshold is 300,000 as a standard, and then it's 500,000 where it relates to contractual obligations and 500,000 for the disposal of land or property. So that's our starting point to say, well, these are key decisions. And of course, members or officers are able to take key decisions in certain specified circumstances. So moving on to what the proposed thresholds for committee decisions could be, and again, these were the question marks in the outline terms of reference that we looked at in the slides last time. So with award of contracts, I was trying to think around, instead of having a specific figure in mind, potentially having things in place that refer to material decisions that might have, that if they're outside of the approved budget or they're not routine, or might involve significant expenditure in the context of that particular budget, or because you might have a budget which is a few million pounds, and an expenditure within that budget heading might not, relatively speaking, be significant, but you might have the same amount of expenditure within another budget heading, which is a smaller budget, which, because of the size of that budget, does become something more significant. So I was trying to sort of suggest or to avoid having particular figures in place, which, you know, as I said, can cause potential issues around the context. So to have something a little more fluid in place, which might be a reference to a material decision. So that would be the trigger. But we'd need to define, of course, what sort of things might be considered material. And I would suggest that it would be head of paid service directors and 151 who have that responsibility for determining what's material on a case-by-case basis. So I'd be interested to hear what members think about that. Councillor Prater?
Honestly, I think that the existing thresholds are clearer and don't end up with concerns or fluffiness about what material is and whether it's inside or outside. Acquisition of disposal of land or property. There are regular disposals of small ransom strips and verges and stuff like that. They all go into committee. Actually having genuine cash thresholds at that stage, I think seems quite straightforward and really easy to manage. It doesn't require anyone having to have a debate about whether this is material or not. If it's above this much money, do it. If it's below that much money, it's not a key decision.
But the point is that I suppose I should have set them out on separate slides. So the key decision element there isn't the threshold by which a committee has to take the decision. That they're separate things as such. So something that's over those thresholds is considered to be a key decision. So of course we've got the requirements around adequate prior notice on the forward plan and that type of thing, and key decisions can still be taken by officers where it's appropriate to do so and where there's appropriate delegations in place. And I would never advocate saying all key decisions have to be taken by members, because again that's going to overload committees. So it's a case of saying, well, here's your key decision thresholds, but if you want to apply thresholds for these particular types of things, such as award of contracts and disposal or acquisition of property, what level might they be set at? Bearing in mind that these are the key decision thresholds and acknowledging that officers will still need to take some key decisions. So I suppose what I'm saying is the threshold ideally needs to be higher than that key decision threshold. Does that make sense?
Not really, because if key decision, you've got a call-in process anyway. Therefore, if it's a key decision on the list and half of the committee across two groups thinks that it should be brought to committee, then they can bring it to committee because we agreed there last time. So I don't see that one needs. So I don't think that we need to be too cute about this. I accept that you're looking, but basically, unless there's a good reason not to, one would put it to committee. And I don't see why. I actually think that decisions that do involve £500,000 worth of acquisition or disposal or a £500,000 contractual obligation, I think that should pretty regularly be in front of committee unless there's a really good reason not to, which would be spelled out in the key decision.
Oh, okay. Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, I support what Tim is saying. Actually, the thing that I don't see there is where you have particular types of contracts where you might have additional work that might take it above the original contracted price, or you have scope creep, or you have something like that, where you have a decision that's made in one area, which, as a consequence of something like that, could take it up into the next band. So it could take it from the 300,000 to the 500,000. So I think just in terms of how that is identified and reported back to committee, somewhere along the way, although it's not included in the original award, maybe as part of that decision making, we need to make it clear that it might be, if it goes above the approved budget level, as you've said here, but maybe we might want to think about bringing that bringing that bar down. I don't know how many contracts that are placed through the council that are time and materials, for example, which can get away from you quite easily sometimes. So I'm just wondering whether the as you said, the water contract, if it's outside the approved budget, or if it's outside of the approved contract limit that's been set as part of the previous key decision. I don't really fully understand that at the moment, but I think those things should really be visible to the respective committees, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely, I agree. If you have had a decision saying we agree to, I don't know, acquire this land at a value of 500,000 and would delegate authority to officers to do all necessary things required in terms of contracts and legal and all the rest of it, and then for some reason the price increases, then they wouldn't be able to take that decision or go through with entering into the agreements, because the authority to do so is only to a value of 500, so it would have to come back anyway because it's beyond the agreed envelope budget, if you like. Or equally, if something is being done where it will take it beyond the annually agreed budgets, then there might be a need for environment, or if not, then it needs to come back to members to say, look, members, this was our agreed budget that you agreed at the annual meeting, but now this has happened and we need more money. So are you happy to agree it? That sort of thing. So that will always come back to members. There's always going to be that oversight and protection there. It's not a case of officers just being able to go off and take decisions as they wish. But I think it's a difficult one. I mean, as Councillor Prater said as well, in terms of if you're applying concepts such as material, it does give scope, doesn't it, for interpretation. One person's material might not be another person's material, which is why I've said, I think it's important to have something in place that says these are the types of things that will be material, so that there's consistency around the application of that. But I mean, if you want to have specific cover-all thresholds, so for example, as I say, just separating out the fact that what we've got there refers the top key decision bullet point is about key decisions. It's not about the specific contract value. It's not about the specific acquisition or disposal value being the trigger for it to come into committee. It's simply saying where these thresholds are met, it becomes a key decision. And that decision might be taken by officers, or it might be taken by members, depending on the scheme of delegation. So I think if you're fixing them at the same level, that then means that all key decisions on contractual obligations and on acquisition or disposal of property will be determined by members, and officers will never take a key decision in that respect. And I think, and that's not what we want here. So that's why I'm saying, if you're going to look at thresholds to say if a contract is of such a value, or if this purchase is of X value, they need to be higher than the key decision thresholds, which is why that leads me then back to saying, well, actually, it might be preferable to say, instead of having those fixed figures, that we have this what's material. And we could build into, I've put there in that sub bullet point at the bottom that the head of paid service directors and 151 determine what's material on a case by case basis. It might be that instead we say, well, they determine it in consultation with the chair. So there's that oversight. So there's that collective officers with their professional experience and skills are able to discuss that with the lead member in that area to come to a collective decision to say, well, this is material because of X, Y, and Z. Because I just think that setting specific figures is potentially problematic. And as I say, as well as what I've just said in terms of the scope or the size of particular budgets, if you've got a massive budget, it might be that an acquisition for 500 grand is actually not that significant or material in terms of that budget. But if it's a smaller budget, then it probably would be. Sorry if you can hear my dog moaning, by the way. She's grumbling at me for whatever reason. So yeah, that's why I was suggesting, instead of having specifics around figures, having something a little more flexible might be worthwhile. Councillor Hollingsby?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think you lost me about 10 minutes ago, to be honest, on just trying to grapple with what you're saying. I mean, what are we actually trying to achieve here?
Well, the thing is, it's about saying, if a decision to enter into a contract or to buy or sell property is above a fixed figure, so we could say 500, then it has to go to members. If it's below that, it's officers. That's what we're saying here. What threshold is appropriate?
Yeah, I understand that, but then you've gone on about other deciding when it's a material consideration and other points, and I'm just thinking, how clear is this for anybody actually trying to understand how the system works?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, as an alternative to having a specific figure of, say, 500,000, you might say, where a decision is considered to be, or the expenditure is considered to be material, that's what triggers it going to members, rather than it falling over a certain value, because that, to me, gives a bit more flexibility and covers off a broader scope of issues potentially. Councillor Hollingsby?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so sorry if I lost you. I certainly didn't mean to, but I know this.
I just think it's okay. Overcomplicated. I felt.
Okay, Councillor Praser?
Agree with Jenny. Overcomplicated. I'm still struggling to think of the key decision that I don't want to go to a committee.
Okay.
And therefore, as far as I can see at this moment, you've got key decision financial thresholds currently 355. I get that. The second line could just read the key decisions go to committee. What are the circumstances? And maybe I'm being, maybe somebody can help me here. What sort of decisions of a value of above £500,000 would you not like to go to committee or council, please? Because I don't get that.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Yes. Well, it's difficult to pluck something out. It's just, I suppose, I just want to make the point that there is, presently, you don't have a system that says all key decisions have to be taken by members.
But we'd like one, so let's build it. Let's do that.
But then you're risking overloading committees in terms of the workload.
There aren't that many £500,000 decisions made each week.
Okay. Would it be helpful then if I came back with something a little more? Do you want me to go away and have a think about, where these key decisions might be that fall outside of where you would have that going before members?
Yeah, I mean, I think the delegation above those numbers, I think, to officers should be by exception and not by standing order. If maybe there's a consideration of the forward plan, maybe you can bring things to a committee in advance and say, here is the forward plan. We'd like to take these under, officers would like these decisions, please, for certain reasons. I'm thinking potentially in regards of Otterpool or something like that. Maybe there are bits of work around that needs to be dealt with by officers as opposed to in a committee. But one deals with those by exception. I would have thought that the basic principle that key decisions are made by committees is a reasonably simple basic principle and removes all of the confusion that Jenny and I share at this moment about, okay, it's a key decision, but it's above it's above the value of this key decision, but we don't think it needs to go to committee and can just be maybe our officers. The keeping it simple has a lot of attraction.
Okay.
Sorry, could I just jump in? Thank you, Councillor. and the other councillors have spoken. Would it be useful if we come back to you at the next working group meeting with some further clarification on this point, some working examples, and then obviously it's up to members to provide us with guidance?
I think that would be really helpful, but I think that the key starting point, as far as I'm concerned, is that you've got to be giving justifications why key decisions are not to go to committee, rather than reasons why key decisions should go to committee.
Yes.
The intention should be that key decisions go to committee by default, except.
Yes, yeah, understood, Councillor Prater. I think it'd be useful if we come back to you all with some working examples, and perhaps that will help, help the issue and help iron out any remaining issues.
Just before I come to you, Councillor Thomas, the other thing, of course, with key decisions is that there's different limbs to it. So you've got one limb of a key decision relates to, well, the legislation doesn't prescribe the financial threshold. It's the council if they want to do that. So the legislation says it's something that's significant. So let's focus on your key decision. Your key decision threshold is saying decisions of a value of this level or higher are key decisions, but the other limb of key decision, of course, is where it has an impact on one or more, a significant impact on one or more wards. So there's that type of key decision as well. So it's important to remember that if you're simply saying all key decisions have to come to members, you're not just capturing the financial side of it in terms of that threshold, you're also capturing the other limb as well. But we can certainly come back and put forward some examples and discuss this further. But Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, I don't want this to go on any longer than it has to. Again, I was going to say exactly the same thing in terms of what we're required to do under PLC 2015, for example. But also, and again, picking up a point on that Tim has made, is that if we had a look at what we've placed in the last 2 years or the last 3 years, and we say these are the values, and so going forward, this lot here would be set through this committee, and this is the decision, and then I think we'd understand what potential workloads were going to be, just picking up on Tim's point to make sure that we understood that, and your point indeed, that we weren't overloading the committees with some of these decisions, but we're able to see what the phasing of this looks like as well over say a 3 or a 4 year term. And I think it'll help us then to understand what we need to do, what individual committees need to do going forward. But again, it has to be that we're not constraining the officers and the Section 151 officer without unnecessarily, but just applying our rule to make sure that we're seen to be doing what we're meant to do as elected members. So again, it's a fine line, I know that, but if we could have that information, I think it'd be very happy.
I suppose, just as you were talking there, it came to mind. So just by way of an example, say at the annual budget, you say there's a big project that's due to take place that's, got political backing, you're all behind it, but of course it needs a budget to do that. So say at the annual budget, an element of that budget is, right, we've got a specific budget head of £5 million to enable, let's say, a housing development to take place, and so officers, so a decision has been made behind that's what, so the budget is put in place, and then you've got a decision by the committees to say, yeah, we want to go ahead with this. Then within the scope of that, you're going to have there will be, it might be that there's an acquisition of land required that is 2-3 million, or it might be that you have to enter into contracts with developers that are significantly more than that threshold. Are you saying you want all of those to come back, or are you saying where members have already had that, where members in essence have said, we agree to this amount of budget being put aside for this project development, then officers can go off and just work within that budget?
No more than that. That's exactly the way it's done now, is that if that project is agreed for that, and then it's literally written into the recommendations for the cabinet or the council that that is then delegated to, by exception, is delegated to the officer, generally a named officer, in order to make that thing happen within that named budget. That's fine. That's specifying a delegation by exception. That's specifying those delegations by exception within a total budget which has been set by committee. Got no problem with that at all. But that would be exactly the same process as happens at the moment. I don't think that makes sense.
That's helpful. So it's not a case of any decision that's above those thresholds, regardless. It's simply a case of where there isn't already an envelope agreed, or an overarching decision around a certain project or development, that's when you would want them to be coming back as key decisions for members to determine.
Yep.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Right, I'm mindful we've gone over time, so I apologise, but I'll just move on quickly. So the all-member briefing, so it's penciled in, diarised for 6 p.m. on the 11th of December. It's going to be principles based. And it's going to outline for all members the work that's happened so far and an overview of what the structure is moving towards and what it's going to be, and the timeline there. What it isn't going to be is an opportunity for all members to start having their say on the minutiae and the specifics, etc., or the structure, etc. That's not to say that they're not to have that input. It's just that's not the forum for it. So what I would say is, feeding back to your group members, you can say afterwards, let's have a discussion about what's been presented to us, and do you have anything that you want me to feed back in through this working group? So the working group's the forum for looking at, in more detail, and it's not the member briefing, because if we were to do that, it becomes really unfocused and it's going to be unwieldy. And the reason we've got a working group is to be able to have yourselves as group leaders represent your groups and feed in and have a more focused way of developing this. So yeah, that's on the 11th of December. The only other thing is, I suppose, the only other slide is discussion, but we've had lots of discussion. I suppose you perhaps don't want more at this time, but what I referred to Gemma having sent round that comparison, I don't think there's anything necessarily we need to discuss around that unless anyone wants to. It's just a table that says where certain decisions were taken or would be taken now or had been taken now, and where they would potentially be taken in the proposed structure, subject of course to us agreeing the detailed terms of reference and the actual structure itself. So it's just indicative, I suppose, is what I'm saying. It's just to give you a flavour of where certain decisions might be taken in future, based loosely based upon where we are presently in terms of what that structure might look like. So if you have any queries on that, I'm happy to discuss them now, but I mean, if not, then I'm happy to hand back to Gemma and to Susan and Deep.
I think I just wanted to say that paper coming out I thought was really helpful from Gemma. I think the split I thought was much better between committees than I thought it might have been. I thought it might have all fallen in one place, but actually it split quite well, I thought, across the committees, and as an indication of how that might work in here. Hindsight is no way of forecasting the future, but I think as an indication of how that would have worked over recent months, I thought that was quite helpful, that there was a good piece of work for each of the committees there. And I thought it was useful to be able to see that. And I'd also say thank you for today, because I thought this is structured well. And I think we've teased out some relatively significant issues there. I know that some of which were vexing or concerning some people. I hope we've got some outcomes there that can help that give them some clarity and take that forward.
Thank you, Councillor.
Can I just ask? Sorry, I just left the room for a couple of minutes. Is the all member briefing? Is it? Sorry, excuse me. Somebody's just come in now. Is it face to face in the chamber?
I'll be joining remotely, so I don't know.
It's remote, Councillor Hornsby. It's an online meeting.
Is it? Okay. All right. Thank you. Pity about that. I think a face-to-face meeting would have been better, but that's only my view. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so back to, I can't see anyone else indicating. Thanks very much, David, for taking us through it, and thanks members for really, really useful input. And I do think actually it's been a really significant meeting in moving forward in terms of that design work, which, you know, we absolutely need to move forward. So I thank you for giving us that input. Can I just check in terms of the last item you mentioned about the brief that Gemma sent through, just so again for clarity, where something, where a matter is outside of the budget framework, and we do have things through the year which are out there, they don't have a budget. My understanding, just checking this, David, and with colleagues and members, where there is something that is outside of the budget framework, it will go to resources committee and then on to council. Where something is within the budget, but there might be a change to delivery or it might be a policy update, then that would go to the communities committee. And I just really want to make sure I've understood that correctly, that the resources is really only around the budget and some performance issues. It's not around some of the service policy issues, so that there is that separation of duties. Have I understood that correctly, David?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And is that clear? And are members content with that?
Yes.
Because obviously that will help us now to start the drafting and the further design work. I think it'd be really useful as well for us to think through about scoping out the committees and the subcommittees, about what is there. And I'm also a little bit anxious, as some of you may know, about the involvement with particularly the shareholder interests. So what does it mean for our FPPG trustees that are currently cabinet members? What does it mean? Does it mean that the shareholder interest subcommittee are the trustees? I think, can we just give some thought to that? What in a similar vein, what does it mean about Opportunitas and the governance oversight for Opportunitas and EKSDC and Otterpool Park? Because those are the key things that we need to make sure in governance terms we've got them within the umbrella. So that, I think, will be really helpful. But thank you very much for everything. Are there any comments before we close from any of the members or colleagues? No, I can't see anyone indicating.
No.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you. So, David, sorry, just so I'm clear, it's the next time we're all together at the briefing. So when is the actual next working group?
The next working group meeting is on the 18th of December at 11 AM. So yes, the member briefing comes first.
Right. Okay, great. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you, Gemma. That just punctuates between here and Christmas for me. All right. Okay. All right. Well, if everyone's happy, that was a really good session. And thank you, members. Thank you for your contributions. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice evening. Bye.
Good night.